evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We know, the end of a busy day. This is, an extra thing to add, but we hope you'll find it really helpful. So tonight, we're going to spend about an hour going through things on vaccines and some about the amendments. So Tammy Scott, who's our acting Office of Child Care Co-Director, and Dr. Ann Thomas from Oregon Health Authority are gonna kind of lead the discussion. Miriam Cecilia, one of our regional managers, is on as well to help. And I'm not sure if Miriam Calderon, our Early Learning System Director, is already on, and she may be joining us as well. So I am gonna, and then I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the regional manager, and I am going to be monitoring our Q&A box, which I think Tammy will explain to you how we're going to use that. So I'll let you go, Tammy.
Great, thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us again this evening. So if you joined us, excuse me, last session 2 weeks ago, we're going to do things a little bit different tonight to help organize all the questions that are out there. So if you look down in your options, you have a Q&A box. And when you click on that, you can enter in a question. And what we're asking you to do is to look and see if somebody has already entered the question that you have, and then put a like by it so that we know that multiple people have that question. That way we don't have 400 people putting in chats and having a hard time keeping up with it and telling which questions we've answered and which we haven't. So please go in and put a like next to questions that are something that's burning in your mind too, and then we'll know lots of people that have that question and we'll prioritize answering those. If the question isn't quite exactly like your scenario, go ahead and still indicate that that's, in the range, and then it also has the ability for you to put in a comment that would provide more details about your own particular scenario. But the best way to make sure that your question gets answered tonight is to go ahead and like somebody else's who's already put it there, so we'll know lots of people have that same question. Okay. So tonight we are going to focus on two different areas. We're going to be focusing on vaccines first, because we know that's the hot topic of the week and there's a lot of questions out there. And then after vaccines, we're going to take a little bit of time at the end to review the other few amendments that came out on January 12th. What we found last night is that there really weren't a lot of questions about it. So the majority of our time tonight is going to be spent on vaccinations and getting all that guidance out there for you. So we're gonna just jump in with that, and we have Dr. Ann Thomas here, and she's gonna do the majority of the talking tonight on vaccines, but I'm gonna kick us off on a few things. So what do you need to know about the vaccines? They are free, and you do not need health insurance in order to get the vaccine. Now, what we're hearing from some of the counties is that they're requesting that you bring an insurance card if you have insurance, because while doesn't cost you anything to get the vaccine, they are able to get a reimbursement for part of the cost. So if you have an insurance card, go ahead and bring it, but it's not required. They are not turning people away if they don't have insurance. And we are also told by Oregon Health Authority, and what they put out to the local county health departments, is that you don't have to show proof that you're an early learning provider. You may be asked to declare that in some manner, but what we're told is that you do not have to actually show proof. We did send out an email on Monday. Is today Thursday? I think it was Monday evening, explaining who qualifies for the vaccine and kind of some information about how to access it. And in that letter, we had a link to an attestation form that you could fill out for your staff if you wanted to just give them something to have in their hands so they feel a little extra secure when they're going. So that attestation form, you're basically, declaring that you are the operator of an early learning program, and that these are the individuals who are connected to your program, and you're signing off, and then they can take that paper if that would help kind of alleviate some of the stress of how do I prove that I work in early learning. When you're at the vaccination clinic, you will receive a vaccination card or a printout verifying that you received the vaccine. And what I found out today is that it may or may not have your name on it. And we're going to talk more about this, but the vaccines are being administered at the county level. So we know that each county looks a little bit different. So I'm hearing that sometimes the vaccination card just has a date for a follow-up for your second dose. Sometimes it'll actually have your name on it. And you do need to get 2 doses appropriately spaced out to be considered vaccinated. And we're going to talk more about when that vaccine really has taken effect so that you can feel a little bit more secure in whether you need to quarantine or not. And we'll talk about that later on. So who qualifies to get a vaccine in the 1B group? I hope that the letter that we sent on Monday kind of helped clarify this question. All licensed and recorded emergency child care qualify. And this includes all staff and family members that are connected. Well, the family members we're talking about for family child care, registered family and certified family. So it doesn't mean that your family member, your center director, and all your family members qualify unless they happen to work at the facility with you. But it does mean all the staff in the facility, whether it be the person driving the bus or the cook or the teacher, the assistant, they all qualify if they're connected to the child care. Unlicensed emergency child care is qualified to get the vaccine. And again, all the staff that are involved in that. Licensed and recorded non-emergency child care. So these are programs that are not open and running yet. And they haven't been approved to operate as ECC. They are also qualified to go out and get the vaccine. And that's in hopes that, maybe if they're vaccinated, they'll get reopened again so that they're ready to begin operating, because we know there's always a desperate need for childcare in Oregon. And then Oregon Department of Human Services, family, friend, and neighbor caregivers are also qualified for the vaccine. So those are the individuals that are caring for children that are approved to receive employment-related daycare subsidy. So a question has come out, who does not qualify for it? And there are other categories of exempt providers that at this time do not qualify to receive the vaccine in Group 1B, but it doesn't mean that they won't qualify in a future phase. So providers that are what we'd call kind of an informal care situation, that are caring for less than 3 children, that are not ERDC subsidy families, subsidy approved families, they are not qualified to get the vaccine at this time. And also parent cooperatives that are not recorded or emergency child care do not qualify. And Dr. Thomas or Miriam, do you have anything to add about these 2 slides before we move on?
No, I think that's clear.
Okay, great. Whoops, went one too far. So how do we find out where to get a vaccine? And for this, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Thomas and let her talk about these two different categories.
Okay, basically it's divided up into whether you live in the Portland area, which is Clackamas, Multnomah, or Washington County, or if you live somewhere else in the rest of the state. And if you live in the Portland area, you can just go to the OHA COVID-19 website. It's listed here. And there's what we call a chat box. So you just scroll down to the bottom right part of the screen, and there's a little icon that looks like an envelope. And just moving your cursor over it, it will just light up, and I'm looking at it now. It says, "Hello there, use this tool to determine when you can get a COVID-19 vaccine in Oregon." And it will take you through and ask things like your age and whether you're a child care provider or a teacher, and make sure that you're in an eligible category. And then it tells you like where you could go, how to sign up. Now, what we're saying at this time is that we really only want teachers and child care providers to sign up using the chat box. Because if you share it with like your friends, or maybe you have a neighbor who you know really wants to get the vaccine, there's really no way to stop people who say they are child care providers but really aren't from signing up. And if we let people do that, then there won't be enough vaccine for the high priority groups. And we want like everyone on this call to be able to get a vaccine in the next few weeks. So that's the Portland area. For the rest of the state, there are a number of ways that that you will be notified. And for the most part, your best resource is your local public health website, so your county county health department. Also, ELD will be trying to notify people, and they'll have information on the ELD website and Facebook And there's some other websites here that for some of the counties, we already know we have some information about where these events are, and there's a calendar here. And I'll go back to Tammy or Miriam to see if they have anything else to add about how to find a vaccine for the rest of the state.
No, I think the thing that I would add is that, you know, the vaccines are decentralized, meaning that all the counties are taking the lead on how they get those out in their counties. So I think what's important to remember is that every county is different, and it's important to check with your own county to see what instructions they're providing for where to access it and what they'd like you to bring and how they want you to arrive and that sort of information. Okay, Catherine, are there any questions around any slides that we've done so far, or should we keep going? You're muted.
Sorry, I think keep going for right now. There's some coming in, but.
Great. Dr. Thomas, can you talk to us about why we should be getting the vaccine?
Right. At this point in time, vaccination is really the kind of the best, the safest and most effective and reliable way to prevent infection with COVID-19. Now, because it's going to take a while for everyone to get the vaccine, we still need to do all the other things that we've been doing. So we need to wear the face coverings and stay 6 feet apart and wash our hands and avoid big crowds. But the fact is, I mean, if you kind of think back on the last year, it's like there have been all these periods where we go into lockdown, and then the virus starts to go away. And then as soon as we come out and are, mixing around with other people again, it comes back. And so that's kind of just going to keep happening unless as many people as possible get the vaccine. And once enough people have resistance or immunity to COVID-19, then that's the thing that will really reduce spread in the community and make it safe for us to all gather again and visit our families and friends again.
Great. Catherine, anything on this?
There's more questions. I don't know that it's specific. There actually, you know what? There is one about safe. Let me see.
Well, let's do our safety slide and then we'll get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, there was one, if it's okay, Catherine.
Yeah.
Dr. Thomas, could you just reiterate again around needing to wear a mask and if you can still get COVID once you've had the vaccine?
Well, what happens is the vaccine is 95% effective. And what that means is that for every 100 people that get the vaccine, 95 will develop antibodies and be protected. And 5 people might not respond to the vaccine. So there's always that chance that, you could, a small chance, but very small, still a small chance that you could spread it. The other thing we don't know is when they were doing the studies to develop the vaccines, what they looked for was people who were having symptoms with COVID. And yet we do know that some people have COVID and they test positive and they never develop any symptoms, but they can still spread the infection. So there's also, a small chance, even after you've had the vaccine, both doses of the vaccine, that you might get a very mild case and you wouldn't be sick at all or have any symptoms, but you could still spread to other people. So until we know more about that and until we really see the virus rates going way, way down, we all need to keep wearing the face coverings.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I think there's also, are both vaccines okay for children under 18 or is there just
Only
one? Yeah.
There's, off the top of my head, I don't know which one it was. One of them is licensed to age 16 and you have to be 16 or over, and the other one is 18 and over. I think it might be Pfizer that could be given to people that are age 16 or 17. So at this point, we aren't really doing that many children, and we don't know yet about vaccines that will later be available for all children.
Great. I think one of our providers, Nicole, has asked about registering a 16 to 18-year-old who qualifies because they live in a family child care home, which is allowed under our guidelines.
Yes. So you can go through the
Right.
chat box, and they'll tell you where they'll have the vaccine that's appropriate for a 16-year-old.
Okay, yeah, I think we're going to look at the screening tool and make sure that they can make that request somehow. So, or yeah, okay,
Sure, yeah, good question.
thank you.
Dr. Thomas, could you talk about the safety of the vaccine? I know last night on our engagement session, we got a lot of questions about this.
Sure, we've actually, that's kind of the topic right here on this slide, is how safe is it? And I think, I think people are concerned because this all happened so fast. I mean, usually it takes several years to develop a new vaccine, and this one came out in a year, and people are wondering, did the scientists or the vaccine companies, take any shortcuts when they were developing the vaccine? And the fact is, they have been very thorough about how they've done it. The reason it was so fast is because we've never had so much attention on a problem, and we've never had the government put so much money into funding. They funded lots of different vaccine companies to all try and see if they could develop a vaccine. So now we have 2 that have been approved and are licensed to use in Oregon. And these have been tested on tens of thousands of people, like 30 to 40,000 people. And there were people in Oregon who received the vaccine as part of the original trials. And I think it's also important to know that the people that were tested in the vaccine trials come from all different backgrounds and different age groups. We know, for instance, that it works well on people over the age of 65 and from different communities of color. So we aren't really worried about strange reactions that we wouldn't expect because it was only tested on certain people. It was tested on a wide variety of people. Now, usually when a new vaccine gets licensed in this country, there are 2 federal agencies that have special review committees that review all the data from all the studies. And those are the Centers for Disease Control and the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. And both of these have looked at the data very thoroughly and gotten lots of public comment, and have determined that the vaccine is both effective, so it works well, and it's safe. The other thing is that generally, when people get side effects from vaccines, that happens in the first 2 months after vaccination. So the companies that were doing all these studies were required, after they gave people the shot, to keep in touch with them for at least 2 months so they could see during that whole time period if people had any side effects. And so we do have a pretty good idea about what the side effects are and what the common ones are. And so far we haven't seen any rare or unusual things. I mean, I've heard a lot of things like, oh, does it cause infertility or something? It's like, no, it doesn't do anything like that. It's the things that you usually think about when you get a shot. Your arm is sore and maybe it turns red. And a lot of people have either fever or aches and pains in the first day or 2, but those always get better by themselves, where you can take, Tylenol or Advil to make the symptoms feel better. But we haven't found any new or unusual side effects.
Okay. Catherine, any questions around safety?
Let's see. Not safety per se, although I think you kind of talked about this, so I'll ask again. A couple people were wondering about, they said, to their knowledge, the vaccine doesn't prevent getting or spreading COVID, but it makes it more mild and lessens the symptoms if you catch it. Is that true?
Well, for most people, it really does prevent COVID. 95% of the people who get it are protected, and they don't develop symptoms of COVID. They might have a very, very mild case and not have any symptoms. We don't know that for sure yet. Now that people are getting, it's hard because you can't really test that and figure that out unless a lot of people have had the vaccine. And we'll be doing studies where we test people who've been vaccinated to see if they've gotten COVID. But in general, it really does prevent symptoms of the disease, and it certainly does prevent, we know it prevents the hospitalizations and the deaths.
Let's see. I thought I had seen something, but it jumped up here. So let me see if I can find it. Oh, so there was several people would like to know what's in the vaccine that you feel like it's important to know.
I don't have the list of all the ingredients. I mean, there's, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really answer that, but I think, I've heard concerns about people wondering, does it come from like fetal tissue, or does it cause sterility? There's nothing like that in there. I mean, it's made of, a type of messenger RNA, which tells your muscle cells to make the protein of the virus, or that's kind of on the outside of the virus, so that your immune system will recognize it if you ever see like the real COVID virus. I know that there is one, there's an ingredient that is common in vaccine called polysorbate, and if you've ever had a reaction to a vaccine that has polysorbate, and I can send you the website that has that kind of spelled out, because I don't think we have it on a slide. You should, talk to your provider about getting the vaccine, and it might be that you might have a severe side effect if you've had a severe side effect before with a vaccine that has that one ingredient.
Thanks. We've also got a question about what is the effectiveness of the 2 vaccines against the newer, more virulent strain of COVID?
Yeah, at this point, we're not entirely sure. I mean, the only experiments that have been done with like viruses in a test tube in the lab to see if, the antibodies that people have made when they've gotten the vaccine work against that virus in the test tube. And maybe it's not quite as effective, but it will probably still help. But we don't have like the numbers. I can't tell you whether it's 50% effective or 60% effective or 70%. We know that there's a chance that these variants the current vaccine won't be protected, but we're studying that all the time, and it might be that the vaccine gets changed over time to make it more effective against new variants, but I can't give numbers about how effective it is against the new variants yet, because no one really knows.
Okay, thanks. I think, Tammy, I would just go ahead and go on to the next slides, and then we have some other questions that are different topics on vaccines.
Okay.
So a lot of questions that we receive are about requiring staff that work for you to get the vaccination, Dr. Thomas?
Sure. At this point, my agency, the Oregon Health Authority, does not require COVID-19 vaccinations for any group of people or in any workplace setting. So it's not like, some of the routine childhood vaccinations where you're required to get them before a child can enter childcare. At this point, it's a new vaccine, and we're making it voluntary for everybody. It may be that your business, as a decision that for your business, you might decide to try and require your employees to do that. And that's more of a legal question that I can't answer. And so we're asking people to contact the Bureau of Labor and Industry, or BOLI as we call it. And their website is listed on this slide.
Okay, so now we're going to get into, what happens when we get the vaccine and we start experiencing some COVID-like symptoms? Is this a vaccine reaction, or am I getting COVID?
Right. So one thing you should know is that you can't get COVID from the vaccine. So if you start having some symptoms, you have to, think about whether you're the symptoms on the left. Fatigue, chills, muscle ache, joint pain, or particularly if you have, you get the shot in your arm and you have pain or redness at the injection site, that's most likely due to the vaccine. On the right-hand side here, the things that are most likely COVID-19 infection, these are the things that, you screen your staff and the children for every day: fever, cough, shortness of breath, loss of sense of taste or smell. Certainly the circle that says number 3 there, those things are most likely due to COVID or maybe some other virus. But those things are really not going to happen from the vaccine. The tricky thing is that fever could kind of happen in either case. It could either be a vaccine reaction, or a COVID infection. So under number 1 here, if there's no fever and you have something like fatigue or muscle ache or joint pain, it's okay to go to work if you feel well enough to go to work. If you really don't feel that well, you shouldn't go to work. However, if you do have a fever, we do ask that you stay home until the fever gets better. And if you really, all you have is a fever, it's kind of hard to know which way it's going, whether it's most likely a vaccine reaction or whether you have a COVID infection. But if you have the fever only, again, we would say stay at home until the fever gets better. But anytime that you have the fever, if it's not better in 2 days, we would recommend that you see your healthcare provider and consider getting tested. And then kind of the last situation is if you've got the cough or shortness of breath or loss of sense of taste or smell, it could be that maybe you were exposed to someone 5 days ago and now you are getting COVID. So, and these symptoms really aren't from the vaccine. So this would be almost like anyone who shows up for childcare, either a staff or a child who has these symptoms. You sort of treat that the same. You would say, okay, you need to go home. If they aren't able to get a test done, or if they get a test done and it's positive, then it's just, this is COVID. They would need to stay home for 10 days and not come back until they're, they're symptom-free for 24 hours, or, particularly what we're looking for is the fever going away all by itself without taking any medication. If you do have these symptoms and you get a test and it's negative, then you could come back to work. And then kind of the exception to this rule is, what if, say you were exposed to someone last week, but you're feeling fine, but because you were exposed to someone last week, you're now doing a quarantine. So you're still staying home even though you're fine. If you get a shot during that time period, it almost kind of doesn't matter what's going on here. It's like, yeah, you might have a vaccine. It might be that you have symptoms that look just like the vaccine reaction. And normally, if you just have a vaccine reaction, we would say you could work. But if you were exposed a week ago and you're in a quarantine, you still have to stay in quarantine. The only difference is, and kind of like anytime you're in quarantine, if you then start developing these symptoms of the cough, fever, shortness of breath, or the loss of sense of taste or smell, then it's likely that you have COVID, especially since you know that you were exposed and you developed these symptoms. It's likely to be COVID, and you would have to probably stay away for 10 days.
Great.
Let's see. So I'm sure we'll probably have some questions about this.
Yeah, Catherine?
Not specifically about that one. You have a lot that are a little more general that I think I'm going to wait till you get.
You might cover them. Okay.
Okay, I know that there were lots of questions in the Q&A about, do I still need to wear a face covering once I'm vaccinated? And I know, all of us can't wait to get rid of face coverings, but Dr. Thomas?
Sure. So what I'm going to tell you is exactly what we're telling like all of the healthcare workers. We're saying you still need to wear a face covering. And it's part of this problem is that we don't know if the vaccine protects you from getting the very, very mild case where you don't show symptoms, but where you could still spread to other people. Particularly, in childcare, because the children are not wearing face coverings for the most part. So there's still a high risk of transmission, although it's going to be going down a lot. And I think, at some point we'll get to the point where there's not much COVID around and we'll take off the face masks, but for now, we just don't know enough. And so we would like you to keep wearing the face covering.
Okay, so now let's talk about people who are experiencing COVID-like symptoms. If they have received both doses, do they still need to be excluded when they've got some COVID-like symptoms?
Unfortunately, yes. So what happens is you're considered protected from COVID after you've had 2 doses and at least 2 weeks go by, because that's how long it takes for the vaccine to start working. But the problem is, as I mentioned before, the vaccine is 95% effective. So for every 100 people who are vaccinated, there'll be 5 people that maybe the vaccine doesn't quite work as well, and they might be able to still get COVID. So, and it's hard for us to predict who these people are. So similar to people that haven't had a vaccine, if you have one of the screening questions, fever, cough, shortness of breath, loss of sense of taste or smell, difficulty breathing, we would still have to worry that you might have COVID. So we'd ask you to leave the childcare and go home. And it's kind of like it always was. If you get a test that's negative, then you can return within 24 hours after your symptoms are better, after the fever goes away without taking any medicine. But if you test positive or you don't get tested, we'll ask that you would be in isolation for the full 10 days. Now, the fact is, your chances of, if you get these symptoms, the chances are probably good that you actually have some other virus. Maybe it's the flu virus or the common cold virus. So it would be worthwhile to get tested, just because if it's negative, you could come back.
Great. So let's get to the good news question then.
Oh yeah, this
So-
is our one good news
Yes,
question.
good question. Individuals who have received both doses, do they still need a quarantine if they're exposed to a confirmed case?
No. So that's the good news. So again, if you're fully vaccinated, so this is only true if you've had 2 doses and at least 2 weeks have gone by since you got your second dose, then the chance is pretty good that you don't need to quarantine. We would ask that you stay away from childcare. No, I'm sorry. I mean, you can come to work. Oh, no, I got that backwards. You can still come to childcare, but you still need to watch yourself for symptoms, because there's still a low chance that you might be able to get COVID even if you've had the vaccine. So you need to just monitor yourself daily for 14 days. And so, just kind of like any other day when you enter the childcare, someone's going to ask you whether you have cough, fever, shortness of breath, loss of sense of taste or smell. And if you do develop those symptoms, then we would need to worry that maybe you have COVID-19. But if you're checking yourself every day for 14 days and you don't have those symptoms, then yes, you can go to work.
I think you brought up an interesting point there, that even for vaccinated individuals, we still want that daily health check happening when they're arriving to work. And that was something I really hadn't thought about before you just now said that.
Oh, do we have a raised hand?
I don't know, but I think Catherine's got some questions for us.
All right.
I do. Oh, let's see. Good. Additional questions. So we have some that don't necessarily fit in any of your categories. So
Okay.
Let's just start. We have quite a few people interested to know when, if current ECC rules will be adjusted to reflect after people are vaccinated. So quite a few questions along that vein.
I sure hope so, is the short answer. What happens is we kind of have to wait to see that the virus is going away. So we'll be watching the numbers every week. As it is, I have to say, things because of our kind of shutdown, the virus transmission has been going down the last few weeks in a row. So that's good. And then hopefully as more people get vaccinated and there's less virus circulating in our communities, ultimately we will get rid of all of these rules. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. And the fact is, at this point, we're still at the point where maybe like 6 or 7% of Oregonians have gotten the vaccine, and we need it to be much higher. We're not sure how high it is, but probably over half. So I think it's going to be unlikely that we would get there before summer, and it might even take the rest of 2021. But that's just me guessing.
Good. Quite a few people interested to know, can they exclude families who decline vaccinations?
To exclude families, well, at this point, children aren't getting vaccine. And at this point, we don't have any rules about that. So that would be, again, something to ask. I mean, for children at this point, we aren't requiring it, and ELD isn't requiring it, and it's not licensed for children. So at this point, it's kind of not something that we can really even have much of a discussion about. It may be different when we have something that's been tested in children and we have a vaccine that we know is safe for children. But at this point, we're not there yet.
Thanks. Okay, several people would like to know, said, as far as I know, there are 2 brands of vaccines available now. Do I get to choose one brand over the other?
I would say that for the most part, most clinics only have one. And at this point, we don't have any preference. We like the Moderna because it's easier handling. I mean, from the public health standpoint, it doesn't require a -70 freezer. So it's, and it lasts longer once it's been thawed out. But in terms of the safety or the effectiveness, they're really both the same.
Thanks. Question, when will our health check check questions be altered to reflect an exemption for vaccinated individuals?
At this point, the only thing that really changes is that if you've been vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine. So that's mostly going to affect staff at this point, since it's mostly adults who are getting vaccinated, or in some cases, family members, who are 16 and older. And it might be at some point, once children, we have a good vaccine for children, it might be that children who've been vaccinated won't need to quarantine if they've been exposed. So that's certainly something to look forward to, is once, most of the kids have it, if some child does come down with COVID in a cohort, the kids who are vaccinated could probably stay in childcare. The same as it is now for adults.
And Dr. Thomas, can you clarify, vaccinated means both shots, right?
Both shots and 2 weeks after the second dose. Yeah, good point.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, I don't know anything about the timing of vaccines for children. So at this point, kind of the main benefit will be to staff who don't need to quarantine anymore if there's been an exposure.
We have quite a few questions in here of various types around employees or children living in the provider's home who are 16 and 17, several saying that they're not able to schedule them an appointment. They basically, unless they said that their children are staff, they're not allowing them to schedule it. And then a question about, if they are under 18, do they then have to be able to request the Pfizer vaccine because of their age?
Yeah, I can start, Dr. Thomas, because I just went into the chat bot when I saw that question, and I know it clearly states there that you're eligible 16 and above, but I did do the scenario where I entered childcare worker. So it's not, at some points, not giving you the opportunity to say household member, right, of a childcare worker. So I think just to be really clear, the priority group 1B includes household members of in-home childcare providers. So if that's your situation, I would just put childcare worker. We were not, our guidance in working with OHA on how to set these priorities was that it would be really difficult to distinguish household members who sometimes help, sometimes are paid, not paid, who, when childcare children are coming into the home, to really distinguish that. And ultimately our goal is obviously to get, as many Oregonians as we can vaccinated. So, I would do that, and that is clearly you are in the right, because that person is a priority and included in this group. Your 16 or 17-year-old child, if you're an in-home provider, is allowed. So I would just check childcare worker. Hopefully that answers your question. I haven't had the chance to go through all of the different scenarios in the chat box to see how it lands with a 16 or 17-year-old. So if that doesn't answer your question, please put something back in the chat bot. We'll also follow up on this tomorrow with OHA On the second part, how to request, the Pfizer vaccine, we will follow up with that this evening and see, because I think, as Dr. Thomas said, you're not able to sort of request a specific type of vaccine. And so we will get clarity on how that will be handled once you schedule. So more on that soon.
Thanks, Miriam. Several people liked this one. A parent wants to know if we would post our staff vaccine rates. How many are vaccinated? This isn't going to be something mandated, correct?
So I think what it's talking about, like an individual child care center posting who
Right.
got vaccinated and who did not.
Right, so posting vaccine rates. So is there going to be any sort of a requirement that programs will have to do that?
No, from an ELD perspective, vaccines and OHA also, the vaccine is not a requirement. And it's also, and Dr. Thomas, please speak to this too, it's covered by HIPAA privacy policies. And so you actually can't disclose which of your staff have been vaccinated and which have not.
We have a question. Can a person with a heart condition, irregular heartbeat, get the vaccine?
Yes.
Okay. Another one that goes along with confidentiality. Getting the vaccination is supposed to be confidential. So how are we supposed to exclude staff if they don't want to disclose that information? Would we just assume then that they are not vaccinated?
So when it comes into play is if someone has symptoms, then they need to be excluded whether they had the vaccine or not. So you almost don't need to ask, because if they didn't get vaccinated or they did get vaccinated, if they have the COVID symptoms, they would have to be excluded for 10 days and get tested, and then they couldn't come back unless they had a negative test. Now the issue is, I guess it is a bit of a problem if a worker will not say whether they've been vaccinated or not, and there's a situation where there's maybe been an exposure in the class and you don't know whether that person can keep working or not. I guess if you don't know that they are vaccinated, they would have to be quarantined. Although that's maybe more of a legal issue, and I'm not sure if Miriam can address that or if that's something we need to get clarity on.
I'm sorry, Dr. Thomas, what was that?
Well, the question is, what if an employee doesn't want to disclose their vaccine status, and do they need to be excluded? And so if they have symptoms, yes, because anyone, vaccinated or not, has to be excluded. But potentially a staff member is working with a cohort where maybe one of the kids has had it, and if you knew that they were vaccinated, you would say, oh, okay, you don't have to be quarantined. Whereas if they, hadn't been vaccinated, then you say, oh, you have to be quarantined. So it's kind of in their interest, I would think, to disclose, but I don't know. I don't know the legality of whether you can make an employee disclose their status.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would, we have, and I think you referenced this earlier on the COVID-19 page, an FAQ about requiring staff and the link to BOLI. So that could be a question for BOLI, but I think that as you stated, under HIPAA, they don't have to, they don't have to disclose. So I think you would have to ask them to go through the quarantine.
Yeah. I think so too, Miriam. You'd have to err on the side of quarantine then if you don't know.
Yeah.
Tammy, I'm going to throw one or two more questions your way because I know we've got some questions as well about some of the amendments, and I want to give you time to do that, okay?
Okay.
It says, can you clarify about passing along the virus once you're vaccinated? It just moved. Hold on. Did you say, now I have to find where it went. Hold on. Sorry, you guys are all good. There you go. Did you say it only passes along a very mild case to those that are unvaccinated?
So here's the thing. What we don't know is there's a possibility that once you've been vaccinated, you could get a mild case and, you wouldn't have any symptoms and pass it on to other people. We're not even sure if that happens yet. If you do have a mild case, an asymptomatic case, and you pass it to other people, the question is, do those people, are they just going to have a mild illness, yes or no? And I think we don't know that yet.
Okay, and let's just do this one last one here. What documentation do we need for vaccinated staff to exclude them from quarantine after exposure?
We have answered this one on the website. Tammy, if you would like me to read the FAQ that was updated.
Great.
Okay. So as long as the vaccination can be documented, for example, if the vaccinated person has their vaccination record showing that they have received 2 doses and 2 weeks has passed since their last dose, they do not need to have a doctor's note. Also, if they have been exposed, they do not need to quarantine as long as they have some proof of vaccination. I think we've also responded to providers that they might have a screenshot would suffice. So it looks like, does that answer the question, you think, Catherine?
I think so, thank you. Okay, Tammy, I think maybe just in the interest of time to be able to get to some of the other slides, we should move on.
So we are going to shift gears now and review the additional amendments that we didn't talk about 2 weeks ago, or 2 weeks in the past. So we're going to start talking with our drop off and pickup. We made some adjustments to the guidelines that gave an option to drop off and pick up inside the program if there's inclement weather. And, inclement weather isn't just, it's a little rainy outside and it's uncomfortable, but we've got temperatures below freezing. We've got freezing rain and ice, sleet, snow, strong winds, hail, lightning. So you do have an option of having that drop off and pick up occur inside the facility, but there's limitations around that. The parent or adult that's entering must wear a face covering. They need to maintain appropriate social distancing between other families and remain in the entry, not going to the classroom. And there can't be any fans in the drop-off area that would spread air around. And when we talk about the social distancing and remaining in the entry area, you really need to do an analysis of your own program and how much space and how many families it can really accommodate and keep people 6 feet apart. If you have a really small entryway, then you might only be able to have one family at a time. But if it's a larger space, then you might be able to have more than one. Catherine, any questions on that? You are muted.
Sorry, not on that one.
Okay. So we were receiving a lot of questions about additional adults in the program. Can I have practicum students? Can I have volunteers? Can I have somebody come and do special singing lessons? In the fall, can I have people come and do fall school pictures? So we tried to put some clarifications in the guidelines around those additional adults so that it would be a little bit clearer. So you always want to keep those additional adults minimized. The more people that you have in and out of your program, the more chance that you have for spreading the disease. So we added in tutors, special education, and providers of individualized education plans are allowed to be in the programs. And you can use enhance your program services through the use of volunteers and practicum students. And we put in some guidelines around the volunteer and practicum students to just kind of shore it up a little bit. So for volunteers and practicum students, they can only be assigned to one stable group and they can't transfer between different groups. So you can't have a volunteer going to different stable groups throughout the day. They need to stick with one stable group for a 14-day period before they change again. And within that particular stable group, you can only have one additional person at a time. So you can't have a practicum student and 2 volunteer students all at the same time. You want to limit it to one person at a time. And we also put in language that talked about contracted services for activities such as gymnastics or music are not permitted. There's just not enough of a need right now considering the health hazard that it brings about. And then in the group size and stable group section, I know there was some confusion because the amendments document only showed crossouts through the stable groups information around ratio and group size. And when you look at that in the context of the bigger guidelines document, what you'll realize is that was just crossing out the references to the baseline counties. In Oregon, we've moved from the baseline and the phases to the risk levels for the counties. So we removed all references to baseline. So all the requirements around group size and stable groups are still in there, just the references to baseline counties were pulled out. Catherine, anything?
Yeah, there is quite a bit of interest on groups. It's more just when are they going to be able to combine groups?
So that we don't have our groups separated for stable groups.
Yeah.
No, at this point, I think, Dr. Thomas talked about this a little bit earlier, that until we see a shift in our state where the virus is more under control, we're just not having those conversations yet. As the vaccine gets rolled out and the virus gets more under control, then we'll start bringing that up with Oregon Health Authority and making those adjustments. Miriam, do you have anything to add to that? Not at this time, unfortunately. Anything else, Catherine?
Not on group sizes. No.
Okay. In the PPE section, there were two major changes. One of them is about the requirement for outer layers. Outer layers are no longer required, and previously they were required for those doing the health check, for floaters and people feeding infants, and that requirement has been completely removed. So there is no more requirement for that outer layer. And then we also took out references to face shields. And in prior guidelines, it was thought that face shields and masks were equal. But what we've now realized through recommendations from the CDC and the Oregon Health Authority is that cloth-based coverings and face masks really are quite a bit superior to the face shield, because the face shield doesn't limit the aerosol that can go around the shield. But we do recognize that there are times when a face shield is important. I had an email yesterday about somebody who was needing to wear a face shield when they were driving because when they wore a mask, their glasses fogged up. And so that would be an appropriate time when a face shield is more effective. We also know that there are some children that might have some developmental delays that really benefit from being able to see the face and the person talking. So while face masks are preferred, plastic face shields are not prohibited, but we just remove the references to just kind of discourage it a little bit. Anything on that, Catherine?
You do. So it says, we're wondering how best to navigate face shields when considering ELD guidelines and RSSL guidelines, as we have youth arriving to our facility from local schools. In RSSL, face shields are required along with masks and coverings and acceptable. However, in ELD guidelines, they're simply not prohibited. In both documents, face masks and coverings are preferred and required. Which should we aim for as a consistent standard? Masks and coverings in nearly all circumstances? And there's more, but that's basically the question.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that question in the chat and there was some shorthand there, so I didn't really follow all of it. I mean, basically what I can tell you is that we prefer face masks, and that's what we encourage you to use. Face shields aren't prohibited. I'm not familiar with the Ready School Safe Learners and how that guidance might be different. And like I said, I saw it in the chat and I was a little bit confused. So if you have any additional clarifications you can provide in the chat, we'd be happy to revisit that question. Okay, in the daily activities section, there was just a very small addition to 7.2 when it talked about having children that were sleeping being 36 inches apart. We added in cribs to make it clear that this did apply to infants in infant classrooms also. And then in 7.4, we really just put some clarification language in so that it would match up better with the chart in the cleaning section. So it talked about cleaning and sanitizing classroom materials between uses, and we had a lot of questions about that. So we put in clarity that it means between uses by a stable group, And then as they become dirty, so if you see a child mouthing a toy or licking their fingers and then touching the toy, you want to go ahead and pull the toy and get it cleaned before it gets used by another child. And then minimally daily toys need to be cleaned. In the transportation section, the first bullet is really talking about giving a few more options for how to conduct the daily health check. So now the transportation section talks about conducting the daily health check when you're arriving and picking up the child with whatever adult is passing that child off. During the route, so maybe a sibling checks the child in on the bus, and then during the route the child's old enough that they can answer the questions themselves. Or if you can't do the health check during the route or at the pickup, then you do have an option of doing it upon arrival. But if you're not going to do the daily health check until you arrive to the facility, you do have to have a way, if the child is not old enough to answer the questions themselves in the health check, you do have to have a way of contacting the parent or guardian or supervising person to get those questions answered. So it really just provided for different options to support programs with how their individual systems are working. And then for home-based childcare providers, the previous requirement stated that children had to be 3 feet distanced in a vehicle, but we recognize that home-based providers don't always have a big school bus and can't necessarily separate out children by 3 feet. So while it is strongly encouraged, it's no longer required. And then for the seatbelt and the cleaning on car seats, we changed the guidance to say that it doesn't have to be disinfected or sanitized, because what we found out is that that can actually erode the execution of the car seats and the seatbelts. It can erode the fabric. So car seats and seatbelts should only be cleaned with a mild detergent. Catherine, any questions? This was all our slides.
You have a lot of interest in, are we able to reintroduce soft items and wooden items back into the classrooms? What about sensory tables, wet and dry? And that goes along with also a lot of interest in, when will sandboxes be allowed again?
Yeah, and so there hasn't been any changes around sandboxes or sensory materials. Those still need to be done on an individual basis where children have their own bins. Miriam, Cecilia, do you have any input on the soft toys and wooden toys? Because I don't recall that those were required to not be used, but I might not be remembering.
I can pull up the specific guidelines on it, but I know we're just trying to minimize the use of materials that are not easily sanitized. So give me a minute and I'll pull up the exact verbiage, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading in the cleaning and maintenance section, and it talks about soft toys made of fabric such as stuffed animals. Dress-up clothes may be washed in a washing machine. So I don't recall that they were prohibited, but I think, it's best practice to limit the soft toys. But I'm looking in here and it does have options for how to wash it.
Mm-hmm.
You got a lot of interest as well in, when is summer going to be talked about for childcare?
I got that question a couple weeks ago and I thought, oh, I'm just trying to get past the amendments and the vaccines. How do I start approaching summer? But clearly this is the second time in about 2 weeks that I've gotten this question. So we do need to start thinking about that. And I think what would help me, on the next slide, I'm going to share with you a provider contact email. If you would email me what the specific questions are that you're needing guidance on in terms of how it's going to affect summer, that will help me as I start to work through it and propose some things. So thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, we're getting through vaccines and then we're going to have to shift gears, obviously.
And I think you've answered this probably really already. It said, are we able to bring back the sandbox on the playground? And again, I think you answered it by saying individual. Yeah.
There haven't been any changes to sandbox and sensory.
Okay, I'm trying to look to see what else we've got.
I have a couple, I think, for Dr. Thomas,
Oh,
Catherine.
great.
You're looking. There's one that is asking, why are we quarantining for 10 days if you are saying we have to monitor ourselves for 14?
Right. So basically quarantine is to make sure that you are not going to get sick. And we know that the longest time that anyone has ever taken to get sick is 14 days. Now, the risk kind of goes down. Like if you go through that first week and you haven't gotten sick yet, your risk of getting sick goes down each day. So CDC has said it's probably safe to come out of quarantine in 10 days. But because theoretically it might be up to 14 days, that's how long you should monitor your symptoms for.
Thank you. And related to that is, when will ELD adapt rules to latest CDC guidelines, RE quarantine? So I wasn't quite understanding that, because that is included in these amendments. But
Yeah,
so-
we, at this point, we have adopted the CDC recommendations.
Right, and just, 2 weeks ago on our call, we did cover those slides, so maybe that's why the question is coming up today, because they weren't able to be on the call 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
But our quarantine timeline did change to 10 days, which is in line with the CDC. And you can go onto our website and pull up the guidelines, and it'll outline the parts that we weren't able to cover today. Any other burning questions at 7 o'clock? We can have time for one more question.
There's one, oh, here's a good one. Quite a few people wanted to know, why are there two exclusion charts? ELD has one and schools, and they're different. It's going to be difficult when hybrid begins.
Yeah, I have to say, because I haven't looked at the school ones lately, so I'm not sure exactly what the differences are. In some cases, it's just a matter. Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I need to know what the difference is that they're concerned about.
Yeah, I think, thanks for that question, Terry. We'll commit to doing that again. It's been a while since I know that many of us have looked at it, but we will do that and get an answer to this question posted on the FAQs.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's just kind of a different format, but that the information is probably pretty aligned. So we do need to look into that.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to reassure you, we're both getting guidance from public health entities on these. So we'll look at that again.
Yeah, I mean, I know the schools, I mean, the older children are often in more than one stable group. So that's a difference. But I think it's sort of, that's kind of how school works. And the fact is the children in that setting are wearing face coverings, and they're generally they're required to be 6 feet away, and then they're all in a seating chart, and they can, their movements are much more restricted than we would expect in childcare. So I don't know if that addresses part of the issue.
This might be a good question to wrap up on, is if I decide not to get the vaccine, other than not providing protection for myself, how does it affect my coworkers?
Well, I mean, what happens is that you're still at risk for getting it then. And since the children aren't vaccinated, you could still get it. And that means that you could, hopefully your colleagues will be protected, but not all of them are. And just in general, especially since children won't be, it might be a year or so before children are protected. I mean, you're at risk for getting it and then spreading it to other family members. There's still kind of the rest of the world to think about outside of work. And I mean, ultimately, the virus won't go away until as many people as possible are vaccinated.
Well, and you talked about the vaccine is 95% effective, which is good, but there's still 5% that even if they're vaccinated could come down with the virus if they're exposed to it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. It is now 7:03. I just want to remind you, if you weren't with us 2 weeks ago, that on our website, we have updated our FAQ we've updated it actually for the amendments, as well as we've made a new section this week on the vaccine. So everything that Dr. Thomas tonight talked about is on our website in an FAQ forum, because I know it's hard to remember all the facts and figures that she threw at us. So it is all there. We also have technical assistance documents that have been updated with the amendments. They're posted on the website. We removed our old outdated videos that had gone over all the different sections of the guidelines and replaced it with one video summarizing the amendments. And like I said, I would love to hear from you at the provider contact email. Let me know what questions you're having about the summer and what issues I need to start thinking about, and I'll start working on it. And that is it for this evening. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful night.
Bye.